to mainstream strategy employed by 25% of global 2,000 organizations. So I think the keyword there is strategy. It's not just a few people implementing some practices. This is a key part of these large companies' strategies. So obviously there's growing interest. And also it's already been seen to deliver pretty huge results. So in terms of the value of DevOps, and this was a report for 2015 called the State of DevOps Report. It's produced by Puppet Labs, which, be told, is a DevOps vendor, so kind of like asking a barber for a haircut in terms of the value. But they did commission a third party for this, and I think not to focus on the numbers, but the trends here. So what value is it producing? So companies that are considered high-performing IT organizations that are using these practices, they're deploying much more frequently to production. I think we've all heard the stories, deploying to production 20 or 30 times a day for certain product companies. Their lead times are far shorter, and the lead time really is the time in which somebody writes a piece of code to the time it's delivered to the customer. So when is that code showing value? And in these organizations, they're able to commit and then push that code through the pipeline much faster. Fewer failures because of the testing and the rigor around automation. And then when there are issues, these companies are recovering much faster. It's because generally the deployments are smaller and they're easier to roll back. So again, if we didn't even focus on the 200x, the 168x, if it was 5x, it would still be a pretty interesting trend. So DevOps, again, it's this idea of culture, practices, and tools. And I think this pyramid, it's not just Microsoft Smart Art, it really kind of gives the impression of what it is. It's sort of like Maslow's needs here, Maslow's pyramid. You can't really be successful with DevOps tooling unless you have a good understanding of the practices you're trying to achieve. I mean, you can be successful on an individual level, but at a company level, not the case. And you're not going to really embrace those practices unless you have a culture that's promoting this. So really the culture is a foundation here. So again, DevOps, lowering the risk of change through the use of culture, practices, and tools. So I want to touch on culture. Probably no surprise to any technologist that the business really requires two things of us: rapid change and stability. And these things are generally at odds with each other, right? So traditionally in the operations world, rapid change is not something we look forward to. If you want a completely stable application, don't change anything. And then on the development side, we have an opposite incentive. It's to produce as much features in this code and to push it through as fast as possible. And I think traditionally these two departments, why they're at odds. They have different goals. And the business really requires both of these things from us. And to kind of outline the cycle here, what this leads to. This is a depiction of kind of a traditional model. And if we start at the top left, let's just take an example of a production issue that was introduced either through failing infrastructure or bug in the code. The reaction is usually to increase some type of quality check. So that again could be a checklist in operations, or it could be some type of QA regression test. But in either case, it's process. You're introducing new process. When you introduce that process, you now have the effect of reducing the frequency which you can deploy because you have to go through more to get it out. When you reduce that deployment frequency, you're increasing the changes that are in every release. So I think, again, if anyone that's been working in the industry a while, you've probably seen this cycle repeated. And when we increase those changes per release, we're actually increasing the number of issues we're going to have, because there's a lot more regressions now that we have to take into account. There's a lot more code that can conflict. And then the cycle starts over again. More issues, more quality checks. And now our deployment times go from 2 weeks to a month to 3 months. And this is a fairly traditional approach. DevOps tries to flip that, and with a really small change, but it's impactful. The idea is we have a production issue, and when we see those, we're going to introduce some type of automation. So this could be infrastructure automation, this could be testing automation, but the idea is that we're not putting another manual process in place, an automated process in place, what we're going for. And that's going to increase the frequency which we can deploy, because now those checks are free for us. We can do them in our dev environments, we can do them in our pre-production environments, and obviously use them in our production environments. And because we can do that, everything is much more tested along the way, and we can actually get fewer changes in each production release because we're confident that it's going to work. And that has the benefit of when we're doing fewer changes, if anything does go wrong, it's really easy to roll it back. It's an isolated change. You don't have to go through this huge deployment process to bring it back. It's usually just one small thing, do a rollback. So again, this one idea of embracing automation has a very beneficial downstream effect. So the principal benefits of what we're trying to achieve with DevOps: reduce deployment risk, the idea of believable progress. This is a term from Martin Fowler, meaning that just getting a feature done in development isn't progress. It's until that feature is realized by a customer. That's what progress is. So the idea of increasing believable progress, getting faster feedback in our development and from clients, and the idea of quickly recovering. And to do that, you need a culture that embraces these types of things. First, embracing change. So this is a cornerstone of Agile, if anyone is a practitioner. And it's no coincidence. This culture is kind of out of the Agile culture. It's really the operations team trying to understand how they can contribute to an Agile cycle. So it's really the same cornerstones, the idea of embracing change rather than resisting it. The idea, a culture that embraces automating manual tasks, at all costs. A culture that values measurement. So this could be measuring performance in production, measuring the amount of tests that you have and how successful they are, but feeding that back into the loop. And above all, a culture that's collaborative. So development and IT or operations collaborating, but also QA, also information security, your database team. I just think that DevQuas SpecOps is not a very good term. So DevOps, lowering the risk of change through the use of culture, practices, and tools. So let's talk about some practices. One of my favorite analogies out there is this idea of snowflake servers. It's a very simple analogy here. Every snowflake is unique, and in a traditional environment, every server can be unique. So really, the longer that you have a server running, the more it's going to evolve, and probably the better term is devolve. It's going to be patched. It's going to people will be logging onto it to debug production issues. They may solve that issue, but not document how they did it. And after a while, you're just scared to touch these servers. So we don't want snowflake servers in our environments. We want to remove that uniqueness. Instead, we want to embrace this idea of Phoenix servers. And again, this is a term coined by Martin Fowler. It's just simple idea. Just like the Phoenix, a server should be able to be burned to the ground and rise up from the ashes, and work as you need it to. And it's actually, Martin Fowler has a really great story here where he says he wants to put together an operations certificate. And how he would do it, you'd invite him over, for the test, and he'd come with a chainsaw and a baseball bat and take out half of your server room, and then he'll come back the following day, and if you're back up and running, then you pass and you get your certificate. Now it's a kind of it's a crazy example, but there are companies doing that in their operations. So the quintessential example is Netflix and their Chaos Monkey. This process that goes and turns off production servers. That's cost them money at some points, but they really believe in this idea of proving that they have a resilient infrastructure, and you need to have this idea of Phoenix servers to be successful with that. I think the main practice here, what it all comes down to, is the idea of infrastructure as code, writing code to manage configuration and automate provisioning of your infrastructure. So it's taking the process of which building and deploying machines and provisioning them is now is something that's just a configuration that you can version. And with that, now that we're actually developing these, we're using development concepts, we get all the great things that come along with that, like the idea of version control. We can version our environments. We can roll back our environments in the same way that you can roll back a commit. Code review, which is probably a good idea if you have an ops team who's just starting to write code that you want to review it with them. And the idea of small deployments, so we can do tiny changes and push them out and see how they affect the infrastructure. So there's a lot of benefit to embracing the idea of code as infrastructure. And specifically also with Sitecore, I think, and this is how this really makes a click for me. We've solved a lot of these problems already. We've solved CI. There's different approaches, but for the most part, it's a solved problem. So we're versioning our code, and we can get that out to servers successfully. With things like Unicorn and TDS, we've solved the serialized content issue. So now our content from our Sitecore instances is also in our repositories. And the third piece here is taking your infrastructure and versioning that as well. So you're really, all your dependencies are now in your source control. And the idea of versioning your infrastructure along with your the application is a really interesting idea. Say you do an upgrade to .NET to 4.6. You change out of your infrastructure, now you can deploy that, and that didn't work, we just roll it back and the infrastructure rolls back with it. So this idea of putting everything in the repository and pushing it out through your deployment channels is really interesting. Not to say that you rebuild the infrastructure every time you push code, but you have the option to. So again, DevOps, lowering the risk of change through the use of culture, practices, and tools. So I wanted to really get into some tools that folks can take a look at and play with. So this was similar to Scott Brinker's MarTech report. This was a report someone put together to show the current landscape of DevOps tools. I mean, this is already out of date for sure. There are vendors who have popped up since. But you can see what's considered to be part of DevOps in this. Development tools, log analysis tools, configuration management tools, InfoSec, that's a really quickly growing area. Our testing and deployment infrastructures, even down to collaboration platforms. So it's a pretty rich area. There's a lot of tooling involved. But for the most part, on the Windows stack, a lot of these tools are just starting to port themselves over or be native, where we're getting to take advantage of this. 6 years in, I'd say in the last 2 or 3 years, we're seeing a lot of evolution on the Windows side. And for me, I like to think of it as, when I think about these tools, I think about this domino effect that you get. Be as excited as this guy. The idea that you can use any one of these tools on its own and you get some advantage. But when you start creating this tool chain, the benefit that you get begins to grow. So I can just create a VM from an ISO image automatically, great. But then I hook that into a provisioning software so I can configure that VM. And then I hook that into orchestration software like Chef or Salt, and I can now deploy to dozens or hundreds of servers. And each of the piece of tooling is very important, but when you link them together, you start to see this very, this proportionally growing benefit. So I'm going to talk about a few tools today and give you some demos. The ones I'm concentrating on are Packer, in the lower left here, Vagrant, PowerShell desired state configuration, PowerShell DSC, and Chocolatey. And the problems we're looking to solve here, and there's many of them, but just some common ones. The project has about 3 weeks left or 2 weeks left, and you need to add developers to the team to get it out the door. You don't want to spend a day or two getting them set up and configured. You want them just to check out the code, run a couple commands, and come back in an hour or two and have a working environment. The idea of works on my machine, I think as Sitecore, as the complexity has grown over time, the ability for different developers' machines to drift, not be set up quite the right way. Maybe their solar configurations aren't quite right, or and this issue of just people struggling because they're having problems with their specific machine, or they set up something that on their machine that isn't on others. And this idea of we have to get something out quickly and respond to the business, and that's going to require us to branch off, and we need to set up some new environments to test on. And to be able to do that in a day or two rather than a week or two is really helpful. So first, Packer. What's Packer? Packer allows you to automate the creation of virtual machines. So the idea here is that we're just going to start from a machine image, like an ISO image, and then produce a VM at the other end of it. The interesting thing about Packer is you can have one configuration that can work on a variety of platforms. So the same configuration can be used for like an Azure instance, AWS, a VMware, VirtualBox. It's the same file, and it has a lot of tooling to take care of the abstractions. And also, again, you can version your instances, which is really helpful. So I'm going to just quickly open up my John West there. Okay, so let's quickly just look at a Packer file, and so you can get a sense of what it is. It's really just a JSON file. It's pretty simple stuff. Here we're defining the builders, and I'm going to run through this quickly. I just want to give you a flavor. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Not to see Rich.
There we go. Yeah, just get a flavor for what it is. Just shout if you have a hard time reading that. So we're just describing information about the machine. So here's just a URL to my ISO image, in this case Windows Server 2012. Here's the checksum, just to make sure the image is valid before it starts building it. Some ideas like start the machine in the Windows world, you probably want to wait a couple of minutes before you start interacting with it. A user and password for the SSH, and this is something just to mention that when you're doing a lot of this automation stuff, this is appropriate for development, obviously not appropriate for production environments, and there are ways around that using certificates. So you want to either set up the machine and remove these accounts and the SSH server, or you can just start with a hardened configuration. So again, just how large the machine is going to be, in this case 61 gigs, and a bunch of files to run after it starts up. In this case, an auto unattend file, which has been around at Microsoft for many years. This is really just a build unattended install. And then we're going to generate a vagrant file from this, which we'll talk about later, but just some machine VM configuration. So 4 gigs of RAM and have it use 4 CPUs. So again, we're just describing the machine configuration in JSON so that when it builds, it has everything it needs. So let's see a demo of this, and I recorded all my demos, so hopefully this works out well. So here I am, I'm just opening up the Packer directory, looking for my JSON file. Good thing it's there. Just checking that my ISO and checksum is filled out. That's really there are great projects out there, Packer for Windows, if you downloaded it. All of this stuff is really in it already, and you just have to make sure that your disk image and your checksums are correct. And also add your keys. Your key needs to go to the auto attend file. And the auto attend, again, this is an old technology from Microsoft for unassisted installs, and it's just this huge file of kind of Windows configuration. Thankfully, you don't have to write this. Again, there are really good scripts available. So we're just we're just running the command packer build, and we're forcing it just in case I have built a machine already, and pointing to the JSON file. And now it starts. And generally this would be headless. You wouldn't even open up this window to watch it, but obviously it's much funner to watch, more interesting. And at this point, you could get other work done or grab a coffee. So that was it. That was Windows installing right there. Windows is starting up now for the first time. The video, it has been sped up. It's never this fast. It's installing OpenSSH here. It's an SSH server. At this point, you'd run your Windows patches as well. Pull down all the patches from Microsoft or a local server. And there it is. My machine is up and running. Now it's running the provisioning scripts. Here it's going through and compiling all the .NET assemblies so that the first time they're used and started, they're optimized. Again, that took a very long time. So at this point with the provisioning scripts, you can really do anything. I mean, I can configure this box, I can run any kind of random script on it that I'd like. And the last step for Packer is to clean up after itself. So it's deleting all the temporary files. It's halting the machine image that it created. And that's done. So now from this ISO image, we have a VM, and that code can be versioned. I can run this every 2 months to get an updated image that's patched and ready to use. And the idea here, again, is we're building base boxes. So now I have my Windows Server 2012 image, R2, that I can put into my instance and or make available to anyone in the development team. So this is definitely very helpful for ops teams who have to build base images often. So now kind of going up the tool chain to Vagrant. So what Vagrant is, it's a virtual machine configuration layer. It's essentially an engine just for managing virtual machines. And again, the benefit of Vagrant is you can use Vagrant to manage all sorts of virtual machines. You can manage Oracle VirtualBox machines, you can manage VMware machines, and it does a lot of the abstraction for you. And this idea of isolating infrastructure. So now that we're developing in these VMs, and we're taking all of our configuration and putting it into the code, we've wrapped a good layer of isolation around our infrastructure. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And it's really powerful when you start thinking of your environments as disposable. So I literally can just throw away this environment if something's not working quite right, and rebuild it in a matter of minutes and not in hours or days. And Vagrant, what makes it really powerful is the support for provisioners. Now, a provisioner is something that runs after the box comes up. Vagrant has support for PowerShell DSC, which I'll be talking about, but also Puppet, which is a very popular provisioner, Chef, also very popular, Assault. So, and these are tools that can both configure machines and help with the deployment of them. So Vagrant is very open and has a lot of different implementations for provisioners. So now let's look at Vagrant being used. So here I'm just going into my Vagrant directory. Oh, actually, that was the Packer image I just created. I'm sorry. So this is a box image that was created by Packer. I'm essentially, just looking. Okay, I don't have any box images installed on this machine yet, so just did a box list. And now I'm going to add this box image to Vagrant. So really simple, Vagrant box add, and then the name of the box that I want to create, and the source, which was the box image that was generated by Packer. So you can see how we're just kind of going up the stack here. So that box image has now been added to Vagrant, and we're just going to double check that. There it is, Win2012 R2. So now I can use that base image to spin up VMs, as many as I want. So I'm going to go to my Vagrant directory, and this is where you would probably check out your code to. So the idea is you're checking a Vagrant file into your source control, and the idea is I just would check it out, and I would have this Vagrant file in there, and I run this command Vagrant up. And Vagrant up is essentially telling whatever the virtual machine provider is to boot up. So all the configuration I had set in Vagrant is now being activated. It's bringing it up. It's setting network sort of routing, port 80, 443 between my guest and my host. It's assigning the memory and the RAM, and it's also setting the host name for the machine, which would be unique. Mounting any shares between my host and my guest machine. And now that it's up, I'm just going to connect to it with another command, Vagrant RDP. And that'll just, in the Windows launch or remote desktop. And there's my machine. So I was just showing there that there was no, it's a pretty blank machine at this point. I didn't put any provisioners in this area. And so to bring a machine down, again, you're just using Vagrant command line, Vagrant halt. It'll gracefully shut the machine down. So that's Vagrant. Essentially, it helps you manage your VMs, and you can do that with whatever VM software you're using. I think this is where things get really interesting with PowerShell. So on Windows, this is a Windows-specific kind of provisioner. So PowerShell DSC is an extension that lets you create and manage your Windows configurations or configuration sets. So the idea here is that I can take a machine, a Windows machine, and I can say, I want a web server role, or I want a SQL server role, and I'm turning Windows features on and off through the provided PowerShell scripts. And there are more of these scripts being written every week. It's a growing community, and a lot of them being released by Microsoft. So what we're going to show is really taking a base box and setting it up as a Sitecore development server. First, I just want to give a shout out to Jeremy Davis, who's joined us. He did a lot of great work on reverse engineering the Sitecore installer, in which I had written some PowerShell DSC scripts around, to kind of feed that in. I would definitely, you should check out Jeremy's blog. He's been doing a lot of great, just a lot of great work on automating Sitecore and Sitecore installs. So again, PowerShell DSC. The idea here is I can set up different configuration sets. So I have a web server set, a SQL server set, maybe a secure server set. And I'm just showing this stuff in, just doing this through configuration. This will prevent my servers from getting different over time because I can just pull them down, deploy them, and they come up to, just as they were. And the neatest thing about PowerShell is it's state aware. So if you run it twice and something's already been installed, say IIS is already set up, it's not going to do it again. It'll test for it, see that it's installed, and then just move on. So this is much less brittle than just a script you would write yourself, like a PowerShell script you write yourself, because it knows the state that the machine is currently in. And here again, I just want to show, walk you through, look at a config. So this is just loaded up in PowerShell IC, and there are two components to this. We have two scripts. One that's going to just install any dependencies, and in this case, it's installing the web server module so I can control IIS, and then it's loading any custom modules I have on my file system. I'm loading here a Sitecore installer module and a Chocolatey module to install Chocolatey later. And what this looks like is it's pretty simple. You just have a couple of variables at the top of your declaration. It's going to do something, it's called generate, it's a MOF file it's going to create, and this is a compiled version of the configuration. So it's just something that can be deployed to a server and activated on. And then this is the heart of it. We have the configuration and the configuration data. So the configuration data, it has this inheritance structure where I can define different roles. So here I'm defining a Sitecore development role. I'm giving the name of my website, which is defined in my variables above. But I could have many different node names here. I could have a Sitecore development node, I could have a SQL Server node, and they'll all work. And that configuration is applied, that data is applied to this function essentially. And that's going to come through, import all the modules that I need, desired state module, IIS module, NTFS security module, because I'm changing security permissions on folders, and my Sitecore install module. And this is really what it looks like. Here I'm using a script resource. Well, the first one here is IIS. This is as easy as it is to install IIS. I just say Windows feature IIS, ensure that it's present, and my name for this is web server. And then here's a custom one. I'm setting a permission on the web root, and all it's doing is using this module to change the access of the web root, and I'm adding network service to it. And there's a series of scripts like this: install .NET 4.5, install the IIS management console, and it's very easy to read, very easy to set up. Unzipping SIM installer. So that's what the configuration looks like, and let's just check it out. Ooh, that's small. So this time I'm running Vagrant up with this idea of provision. So this forces a provisioning cycle to kick in, and the provisioner is DSC in this case. So it's starting up the VM. We've seen this before. And at this time, it's just waiting for the VM to activate so it can get access to it through WinRM, which is the Windows Remote Management. So at this point, PowerShell DSC is activated. So it's kind of running through the config, installing all the third-party modules that I included. It's telling me what features it installed. It's now generated that compiled MOF file. And that's what the fun starts here. So IIS is being installed. And again, you're just running a single command. So to get to this point, if we were starting with a new project, and we run 3 lines of code, and we're going to have a fully configured server at the end of that. So now IIS is done. It's installing the IIS management console. And this is actually like the debug verbose mode. It wouldn't, generally just it's saying like IIS installed, management's installed. This is really to kind of see, I like to see things scroll. It makes me feel like I'm getting a lot done. .NET 4.5, it's installing SIM. So SIM is a Sitecore Instance Manager, recently open sourced, and they're working on the 2.0 version, which using the Sitecore installer is a great tool for now, but I think SIM could, with work, could be used in the same manner. So we just load it through here, and then we could execute SIM to install instances. So again, just running through the scripts here. Now it's actually installing Mongo. So we've installed IIS, we've installed Sitecore already through the installer. Now we're installing the Mongo database. And again, I don't know the last time you set up a Sitecore environment from scratch, but usually isn't this fast. So now I'm logging into my very skinny instance of Windows. It's a fresh version of Windows, so of course MSN is my home page. So I'm just going to spin up Sitecore now, and also open up the Mongo directory, just because I like to watch that Mongo was hooked up correctly, and just see the database is being created. So there we go. I can see a couple of the databases created, and the page comes back up. So this is at the point where you would take your CI tools and hook them in. We have a working instance of Sitecore with all of the dependencies installed, and now your CI solution or your deployment solution, you just point it at that directory through web deploy or the custom script, whatever you're using, lay it over onto the machine, and you have your instance of Sitecore running. So the last tool I want to talk about is Chocolatey, Chocolatey NuGet. So this is essentially a package manager for Windows. If you've ever worked in the Nix world, you have apt-get, and it's a really great tool and something that you miss in Windows. And so this is a great open source project someone created to build on top of NuGet to offer us package management in Windows. So the nice thing about it is it's built on the NuGet standard, which has built-in dependency management. So I can say this tool depends on this tool to install. It's got a really large library of applications that are ready to use, and it install these things without manual intervention. Again, on Windows, generally unassisted installs aren't always there. And I really enjoy this tool. You can update all of your applications that you install through it by running a command. My machine went down a couple days ago, and this is a colleague's machine I borrowed, and he had Chocolatey installed on it, so I was able to actually bring down all of this tooling onto the machine just by running the Chocolatey commands, which is really cool. And that can be, if you're using NuGet, you can use your local NuGet servers. You can use MyGet, which is a web-based NuGet feed. But the reason it's useful in this chain, I'd say that one of the primary motivations for Chocolatey is just to get your dev machine up and running with the tools that you like. But we also use it to install tools for servers. So say your Process Explorer, your Sitecore log analyzer, Beartail, whatever you want to use to debug a server, you can deploy through Chocolatey. Oop. Went through a couple. And again, I think I have time for this last one here. So in this case, I'm kind of resetting the configuration of the machine. And so I can run I created a provisioner for Chocolatey and replace some of the DSC stuff. And so I'm going to run again just this vagrant up. Normally what you would do is this would all be installed at the same time. You'd install the Sitecore stuff, the Mongo stuff, and then you run Chocolatey after. Just really to kind of break up the demos and putting them in different tools. So again, the machine's coming up. We're going to wait for a provision step. The provision is running. And now it's going to import the modules. So now it's actually pulling down Chocolatey and installing it. It's doing this live, just sort of online. I've created my own Chocolatey feed. It's available at MyGet, and that's where it's sourcing these packages from. the first thing it's going to install is 7-zip, and we're just going to see it kind of rip through a bunch of applications that we generally use in our server configurations. So it's installing Sitecore Log Analyzer, a super useful tool to have on production servers. It's worth noting that Chocolatey, this is, you probably want to use your own, so now it's on Sitecore Courier. You probably want to use your own Chocolatey feeds and not source from the public ones if you're worried about security. Because Chocolatey is running and installing something unassisted. So if someone was to get hold of that feed that you're sourcing from, they could slip something malicious in there. So you generally want to source from your own local sort of NuGet servers. So here again, Notepad++, Beartail, kind of all the stuff that you might want on your machine when you log into it. You can even install Mongo through Chocolatey, though I chose to do it a different way. Some of these tools, there is some overlap with what you can do. And then Fiddler, say you wanted to kind of debug the web traffic. So that gets the point across. Really it's just the idea of package management for Windows, which is really cool. So I guess just to kind of walk through what we've done so far. Again, this idea of kind of building up. We've taken an ISO image and created a VM image from it. So it's like a straight ISO and created a box. We installed that box into Vagrant. And then we attached it to this PowerShell desired state configuration to build this machine up, install all the things, all the Windows features that we want installed on it. And then we ran Chocolatey on top of that to bring down any special applications that are not Windows specific. So we went from ISO image to a fully configured machine, just running a series of scripts and using a couple tools. One day work all done while out eating breakfast. And again, this kind of really enforces this idea of this domino effect. And while this is just your dev machine, now you take this idea and you hook it up to Chef or Salt, and you're taking these instances and you're pushing them out, 5 or 10 at a time, and you've gotten some real heavy automation. So I think again, just this is the takeaway. We know about versioning our code. We can now version our content. I think there's really great best practices out there for that. And I think the next step is to take our infrastructure and get that into source control as well. Once we're all in the same tool chain, we really get this automation provides us a lot of benefit. Thank you. So I have some buttons to give away if there are any questions.
What's your experience with Octopus deploying when it comes to actually deploying the code for your sites out and getting that in a continuous?
Sure, yeah. So we're not using Octopus. I'm definitely aware of Octopus, and we checked it out. Octopus makes a lot of sense in terms of the agent pull model. We're generally using CI servers to deploy, and that means the CI servers have to be close to where it's deploying to. So I think Octopus really helps with this agent model to just check in and kind of pull configuration down through those packages. I think with this idea of the domino here, that's the next, that kind of orchestration software is really the next piece. This will get you as far as the dev environment, kind of the tools I showed today, and then you'd use Octopus to really say, okay, let's pull down the latest version of whatever's in my package and deploy it, and then you can run these same tools. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What are your favorite CI tools to use?
We use Jenkins. I think we do more than .NET development, so it's for us it's nice to have a tool that will work equally as well. Sort of cross-platform in that way. But again, I think it's a very solved problem, and it's just really got to pick one. We've had a lot of good luck with Jenkins now. Sure.
Can you talk at all about what the sort of the change process looks like when you do make a production environment change that now you have checked in and you need to redeploy? What's the cutover process, and is there impact on Sitecore licensing, things like that?
Yeah, so the Sitecore licensing one's a really good point.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation I've had where if you're doing like for like, it's fine. If you're kind of just putting an environment, tearing an environment down and building it up, it's fine. And there are a lot of devil in the details with production deployments. You probably have to think about load balancers, you know, kind of doing scripts that take something out of the rotation, then replace that machine, test that it's come back up, and then bring it back into rotation and keep rolling. You know, I think there's those practices are very similar to what you'd be doing today through automation. So again, I think these tools don't impact some of that, you know, some of that approach. I think the hope is that you can take that run book that was manual before, you know, and script it. Some of the tools like Packer, you run every once in a while. You know, you know, it's not running all the time. But the tools like PowerShell DSC, you can run them much more often. You know, really anytime you want to do a large update to the environment. Maybe it's a large code push, or maybe you have a process where you're saying we're just going to replace the servers every quarter just to make sure that they're, you know, we're testing that our configuration is valid. But yeah, licensing, you have to be careful. You're not just creating environments that are unlicensed, obviously. I think that's the biggest worry there.
What was I gonna ask? Sorry. So SQL Server persistence, sort of spin it up real quick and then throwing TDS or whatever on top of that. Is that what you guys recommend? Is your standard model now?
What do you mean? So I'm just not sure if I'm.
So I didn't see. I saw you spin up the website servers, but none of the back end, maybe dedicated SQL servers or anything.
Yeah, sure. So yes, SQL. The install of SQL Server it's solvable. You know, right. So you can get SQL spun up, but then you need other tooling to, you know, to get the latest onto it. You know, through, you know, restoring backs or you know, backpacks or just back files. So, I mean, I would just include that into the, you know, those scripts kind of into the tool. I think it'll probably get away from the DSC stuff where it's very stateful, and you'll probably get into the territory of writing some custom scripts for that. One tool that we have recently developed, you know, you can point it at a SQL backup kind of directory, and it'll pull the right Sitecore data backups out of it, and then restore them to your target environment to help automate that, you know, that idea. So yeah, I think it would just be you know, you'd have a SQL Server rule in PowerShell DSC that would get the machine stood up, SQL Server installed, and then it's probably custom scripts to get your data in place. People are generally, you know, I think be a little bit more hesitant around destroying your SQL Server infrastructure and bringing it back up often, you know, because if you're using things like merge replication and, you know, you have all of these, it can get complicated quick, and I think, you know, SQL probably isn't as caught up to this world, you know, as some other tools are. So you probably, you know, have to have deep expertise on how SQL operates. Yeah, this is really mostly in the web server roles is, you know, our use case. Yeah. Sure.
With the features installed with the PowerShell, is there anything that goes deeper into IIS if you wanted to install like the IIS rewrite 2.0 module or change your HTTP header so you're not broadcasting if you've got a .NET server running things like that?
Yeah, so I don't know about those specifically. But the module is called X Web Administration. It's very well documented. And just a kind of a pro tip is that if you look at any of these PowerShell DSC modules, if it begins with an X, that means Microsoft created it. If it begins with a C, it means it's community. And so that's a kind of an official one. And you can do things like, you know, bindings and really anything that you have control over in the management console, you have control over. But I'm not quite sure if they have 100% coverage. Yeah. Sure.
Getting a little bit overwhelmed with the overlap between the tools.
Yes.
Like it seems like they can all do similar things. So what's the general rule of thumb?
Yeah, so Packer and Vagrant are created by the same company. So that's why they both are able to provision. You know, they just said, hey, we're using it over here. Let's add it into Packer. I think there's definitely overlap between them, but they each do. There is some unique. You know, there's not complete overlap, so they each definitely fill their own niche. You could, in this case, probably do all your provisioning in Packer, right? So you build these web servers ready to kind of consume if you wanted to. But yeah, I think that slide I showed earlier with all of the different technologies, you know, there's a lot being added right now, you know, a lot being created. It's kind of an exciting time for this technology, but and because of that, I think that's why we're seeing this overlap. This tool set, I think, is if anything I would take out of it, it's probably Chocolatey, because you can install everything you're doing through Chocolatey. You can write custom PowerShell DSC scripts to do it. So I think, if anything, that's the one to probably rip off that tool set. Ben?
Oh, so you showed, or at least discussed, the use of Vagrant and Packer to set up like a local dev environment.
Yeah.
Where would continuous integration fit in for the local developer environments?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, for the local developer environment, you're probably just using some of the scripts you're using in CI, like your deployment scripts that are automated through CI. You're probably just running them, you know, maybe you activate them through Visual Studio. Maybe you activate them through Shell, I'm not sure. But, you know, your deployment scripts. You don't need to use CI locally generally, right? I mean, you can just, a lot of times what we do is we take, we add custom scripts to Jenkins, you know, that handle a lot of the deployment tasks. And so we would just hook those into our Visual Studio environment on build. So yeah, so you don't, you know, but once you step up to the dev integration environment, you know, I think that's where, you know, you would hook in CI generally. So not far from the developer's desktop. Yes?
What do you see as a benefit for using a VM? Because for every project, basically, you're going to set up a new VM environment. Granted, fully automated, that it looks really nice, but yeah. What if you were barebone on the machine? That's what we do, for example. We have a developer laptop image.
Yeah.
Fully, you run Visual Studio. And you start everything from within the Sitecore project, self-contained. There's not even a Sitecore install. You just ship the DLLs to TFS. You download everything. You run everything in IIS Express. Use local DB.
Yep.
And you have no infrastructure to install. And you can run 5, 10 projects at the same time. The different Sitecore versions, all self-contained on the same machine.
On the developer machine. Yeah, and that's certainly a way to go. You know, we use VMs, and we were late to the switch, you know, because we liked running closer to the metal. But we use them, I think, you know, as for us as developers move from project to project, they build up this kind of long list of large databases and machines that, you know, or projects that they have to clean out. And also the things, if you can automate the installs, I think you've got the culture. Right, you know, so you are doing DevOps. It doesn't have to be a VM, but if you're going through kind of manual steps to set them up, and the idea of someone starting on a project and going through manual steps to get their environment configured, and you know, how's it configured on your machine, and let me do the same thing over here. That's the problem that we're trying to solve. Right. So yeah, maybe you can leave Packer, you know, and Vagrant at the door, but you know, you can still use some of these other tools to make sure that your machine is you know, configured correctly and that it happens automatically.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's different solutions to the same problem and both equal.
Yeah.
The tools are tremendously interesting. For sure. Dealing with our SharePoint practice, this would be more uniform across environments. That's a whole different story.
And I mean, we found that as Sitecore environments have gotten more complicated, there's a lot more room for error. You know, and especially at the developer level, if you have someone that's just starting, you know, they haven't been doing Sitecore development for years. It's overwhelming, you know, and you don't want to have them spend, you know, a week just like learning the architecture. Right. You want them just to start writing code and you know, getting some practice. Exactly. And this helps to remove that.
Cool.
And I guess maybe it's just confusion over which tool does what, but like looking at building a dev instance like that, what do you do for like automatically provisioning out just the dev tools like Visual Studio and anything like
yeah, so Chocolatey, that's where I would add that tool. You can so if you go to just chocolatey.org or you just search for it, Google to find it. They have great support for development tools. Okay. So you know, all the latest versions of Visual Studio. It's just you install Chocolatey and you run C install, Choco install, and the name of the package, and then it grabs it, you know, installs it. So Chocolatey, the server use case is the lower use case. It's really the dev environment, like for developers setting up their machines, what we call like repaving. That's a really strong use case for it. And again, on the upgrades, so now that you've installed like 6 or 7 tools, you can run a Chaco update, and it'll go and find the latest versions of those tools and update them for you. So I don't know if anyone uses Notepad++, but it always kind of has this, do you want to update? Do you want to update? You know, and forget that. Just run Chaco update every couple weeks, and it takes care of it.
Or Notepad too.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.